Um, so yeah, sort of named the weekly thing like CoDev. I know we sort of played with that name before. You didn't exactly like it, but I do like the idea that like we're developing together in more ways than just
Yeah,
code, and
yeah,
the
I
world is
like that.
about more than just coding. So, but yeah, I do think it's kind of interesting, like to develop as a developer and how that how how pair coding and doing demos and just screen sharing and playing with that sort of stuff. It's a wonderful way to sort of learn by doing, but also yeah, just learn
What if what if
observing as well.
what if the code develops the person, right?
Well, I
You're
guess
being you're being programmed.
yeah. Well, I guess Rushkoff here says program or be programmed, but I don't know. I don't know if he's
Maybe
holding
both. What if it's program and be programmed?
yeah. Um, yeah, I guess. Well, that's where the co is. The we're co-evolving us and our sort of our encoded creations.
You got your physical copy of Team Who?
Yeah, I realized I was listening to the audiobook version and I realized like how often he was saying like 48 or 32 or whatever the like numbered chapter was. I was like, wow, this must be like really broken down into like bite-sized distinct ideas. And I was like, yeah, it'd probably be a lot better to sort of be able to go through it more slowly, methodically, and maybe do some annotations or note taking and that sort of thing, which is a lot easier when you have a physical copy.
Right, right. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think I did what you had said in terms of pulling everything down. I don't know if for
Cool.
the
That'd be
Convo Island stuff.
um, if if you did, then we should be able to do kind of an interesting test with it, I think, because um, we should be very easily able to track one another's comments, the thing like updates, because um, what happens is they get stored in local storage. So which is like a little browser cache for the site, which means that um, it's actually keeping them. You're keeping a little list, keeping track basically of which ones you've like clicked on and selected, so that then you kind of um, then you'll know when you've clicked on it enough times to have seen all the ones that the other person added. That'll
Cool.
make more sense when we look at it. But yeah, I wanted to try doing it as a PR too, so that it kind of creates a more trackable change log um, where it explains things in a little clearer, like better terms. And
Yeah, and you said the only thing that's auto sort of updating as we're going is the content of the map, right? The actual code and the UI and the backend and all that stuff. If you make changes to that, you need to do a
mhm,
sort of deliberate um,
right, exactly. Yeah,
yeah, pull or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. And actually, one question: when you wrote this with like the check marks and changes, did you like were these unchecked to begin with, and you sort of used this as like a almost like a to-do list, or
No, I just I added it as a kind of thing at the end. But just like I like seeing the checklist for some reason.
actually, I think I did add. You said to add. I don't know if you saw it or not. I forget where I put on here. Oh, and
Yeah,
actually,
there was a comment. Yeah, yeah, I saw your comment.
oh, it's here. So I'm going to stop screen sharing for a half second. Um,
Oh, cool.
Hi, Nima.
Hey, sorry I'm late.
No worries. We just sort of, actually, you'll notice I'm recording. We were just going over some recent work that Connor had done on a little project we're working on called Convo Islands or something. It's a kind of a new thing. We're playing with sort of algorithmic layout of nodes in like a graph viz structure representing sort of uh, replies or comment threads and that sort of thing. But yeah, just a quick intro. This is sort of Connor and I decided recently to do more sort of pair coding and collaborative stuff. We're both sort of near each other in the Toronto area, but it's still sort of useful to do sort of video collaboration because we've been playing with sort of pair coding and some of the tools like what's it called again on Visual Studio Code. They have some sort of live share stuff, which is kind of neat that you can sort of be in each other's code and fold file system. So
yeah, I've seen that, but I've never tried it. So
yeah, it works pretty well. So oh, you're multiplying.
So I have another computer that has a Linux on it, and I realized it's much easier to use that one for coding and the other one for audio.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
If it works, so I mean the recording might. Let's see.
At the moment, your audio is really quiet relative to Robert's, but
I can use that one. Why don't you guys continue your conversation and give me like 2-3 minutes until I figure things out?
Well, it just got a lot better just now too. Yeah.
Let's see. So what I want to do is share my screen on the other computer. And if I go here, oops, see, this is where it's getting troublesome.
So feedback or something.
My microphone.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if you're getting the mic stuff worked out, I guess we can start a little bit more into things. But I guess, once you're back and we have your attention, I guess I'll give a little bit more context and intro to each other, given the two of you haven't met. And actually, Nima and I have only sort of tangentially met through the federated wiki calls that Ward Cunningham has. Actually, there'll be another one sort of just after this call today, but we sort of wound up chatting in the I guess the back channel text area. I'm only vaguely aware of what Nima's working on, but it has to do with sort of like a new take on sort of spreadsheet tools, and he demoed this really cool I guess he might demo it today, but a really cool sort of iterative visual way of doing spreadsheets where you could, like, say, draw a circle and then use another cell to specify the color of that circle, and then use another cell to sort of, like, say you want to, I don't know. Anyways, I'm butchering it. I'm sure Nico will show us.
Cool.
That's great. That was awesome. Yeah. So I mean, the thing is, with this bigger computer, so I do the development for the spreadsheet stuff on my laptop. So let me just quickly share my laptop screen and do the demo on that, and then switch to the other screen for whatever kind of like new project we might want to do, or just like do some random hacking. But let me just do a quick demo of that one on the other laptop. This would be easier next time we do it. So this one, share. And let's see. So on that guy.
I guess there can be multiple.
So can you see my screen?
There can be multiple screens being shared now. Wow. Wait. Yeah.
All right. That's good.
There was.
All right. So let's see. Let me clear the screen. So we should have an empty space. So let me start just by giving a short introduction about who I am and what I do.
Yeah.
So I'm Nima, and I'm a PhD student in University of California, Davis. And as part of my research, I implemented new spreadsheet environment similar to Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, but different. And I made it from ground up, so it doesn't rely on either of these systems. And you can see it here. The distinguishing feature of my system with other conventional electronic spreadsheets is that I provide support for new kind of values inside cells, right? So an example of that would be, suppose you wanted to have a shape inside a cell, right? What you would need to do, for example, suppose you wanted to have a circle in A1, all you would need to do is to type circle and then type shape and pass on the string literal that is stored in B1, and then you get a circle, and then you get a side view here. Let me just make this anything. Okay. So now you get the circle on the side view, right? And so when you have shapes inside cells, then you get this opportunity to extend the spreadsheet formulas with formulas that operate on shapes. So for example, you could have a formula that would paint this circle as red. So suppose we wanted to paint this as red, then we would say paint the shape that is stored in A1 with the color that is specified in B2. And you press enter and you get a red circle. And if you do it green, you get a green circle. So you could do the same thing with another color like cyan. You could say paint the shape that is in A1 with color that is in B3. So you get this. So you get other kinds of formulas as well. So you can get a formula that would put together these two shapes. We call that horizontal concatenation. Kind of like a string concatenation, but shapes could be concatenated horizontally and vertically. So the edge concat takes, for example, two arguments or a range, and it would concatenate those two shapes together. So all the good properties of the spreadsheet grid would carry over to this new domain as well. So if you change a circle to triangle, the change would propagate all the way down to all the dependent cells. Or if you change this cyan to yellow, both of these cells would change. Right. So that's sort of the general kind of stuff that I'm doing, and the rest of the things that I do would be a specialization of this idea of adding support for new kinds of values inside cells, and then having the opportunity to extend the spreadsheet interpreter with operations that would work on those values. Yeah.
And how is this built? And I guess another question is it open somewhere, shared, but is it Elm? Is that what you were telling me about? Or
yeah. So the way this has started was that, so there is this Elm, if you go to Elm website, there is an Elm counter demo. It has started as somewhere here, I think in the Elite app. Elm counter. Counter. There are a lot of examples in Elm that are just simple counters. I just want to give you a, I don't know how to find this. Let's see. Ellie. So Ellie is kind of like a online editor for Elm, and it gives you an editor, and it gives you like a live preview of the code that is written there. So my app has started as essentially this simple thing that you see here. So this is a counter, right? It's a HTML page. It's a Elm application. It's like 50 lines of Elm application. Let's forget about the HTML. So this is all it is. That's like the simplest Elm application that could ever be. And it's a web page consisted of 3 widgets that you see on the right side. Can you see all of those?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So my entire spreadsheet started from extending upon these lines of code, which I think that's maybe the best place to start explaining how Elm works. So yeah, my spreadsheet is based on Elm in the front end, and then after that, once I wanted to add more things, I kind of separated the front end, define some sort of a JSON protocol so that the front end would be backend agnostic. So right now it has an Elm front end that does some stuff, but the main computation or like drawing of these shapes or things like that is handled with a Haskell backend. But it could be any backend. It could be a Python backend, or it could be a Node.js backend. So the Elm interface communicates through JSON with the backend. So do you guys think it would be helpful if I kind of describe what this piece of code works? I also want to know a little bit about what kind of Connor does. I kind of know a little bit about Robert, but I don't know at all about Connor, so I'd really love to know what's Connor up to.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see a little bit of Elm code because I haven't ever written in it, though I've heard about it. I've done a lot of front-end development, mostly with React, but also with just like data viz libraries, which is, for example, the one that we're working on and working with, like is a kind of data viz library, a graph viz library. And
so more like D3 kind of
yeah, it's called Cytoscape. It's specifically for graph visualizations rendering.
Nice.
But yeah, my sort of question too with what you're working on is what's the applications that you imagined for it that got you kind of excited about pursuing this and working on it?
I mean, that's like a multi-layered story, but I think what right now keeps me in motion is values that flow in time and creating programmatic animations. But the interesting thing about it is, I mean, I'm excited about multiple things about this project, but maybe the most exciting thing about it is this sort of general framework that I'm developing, which is the conceptual framework to provide a support for new kind of values inside cells. So that's kind of what
that flow with time. Like my mind goes to like I mean, it's a kind of whatever. It's maybe not the best or most interesting example, but like stock prices or things like that. Like like that fluctuate over time, right?
That's actually a good example. Let me give you another one on the screen. So one value that flows in time is integer values that flow in time, like the number of seconds that have been passed since Unix epoch.
Right.
So, I have a formula for that, which is called Unix epoch. And once you enter that, you get some sort of clock.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So that's an integer value that flows in time. Let's try that in Google Sheets, for example. Let's see. Yeah. Google Sheets actually does have a now formula.
Oh.
But let's see how it is different than our system. So I think it's now. Let's load. So it's now. So current date and time as a date value, right?
Okay.
But would it flow in time? No.
Well,
last time I checked it. So it's 9:25:42, right?
What does it do? Like when you load the page, I guess, like on the page load, does then it changes 9?
Good question. Let's see.
That's what it just updated. Didn't it just update?
Yeah.
I think it updates when you when you press and edit. Okay.
Okay.
So it doesn't tick every second, but if I
Yeah.
say like when I do some sort of an update,
Actually,
it
it's
kind of
oh
refresh.
yeah.
See? It's really dependent on the keyboard input that I'm entering. So the semantics are not meant to be flowing in time, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Uh, so that's the same with, I guess, Excel.
Yeah, this itself is a very interesting distinction because like one of the sort of revolutions in programming was from object oriented to functional programming, which was seen as a sort of transition from objects to flows. Like, and then people at Robert and I have kind of worked with in the past, and I'm still working with some of them, and Robert's still connected to the project. Are very focused or very kind of strong in their opinions about this idea of concentrating on flow-based values, as you're talking about, over like sort of object-centric ones, or
So what does object-oriented programming kind of mean to you? Like, what are some core elements of like object-oriented programming?
yeah, the core element is having a it's typically having classes and instances, where um, a class is like a thing that describes the type of properties that a given object has. So like a person has a name and an age, or something along these lines, and then you could associate functions related to those. To if you are a person, if you're an instance of a person class, then you have these properties. So the whole thing is it's
So
just
classes is one thing that. So you're saying classes would have properties like name and age, and then classes we get instances. So that kind of this sort of a encapsulation, right? Some sort of encapsulation, and also some sort of
and it focuses on the world as something full of objects to be modeled.
well, I feel like the story of objects and classes, and I feel like we had this conversation with Bart actually, and he gave me like a very, very good sort of disentangled perspective over object-oriented programming. And the core elements there, let me see if I can think about it. One of them was encapsulation, which is when you have data kind of not crossing a boundary of an object, and things sort of stay in a way that you can wrap your head around them, right? Like there are like 3 instances of a person class, then each one of us have our own name, right? So that's sort of the encapsulation property. And the other one that you mentioned are functions. And I think the story with functions is it gets a little bit more complicated when you talk about inheritance, for example, object-oriented programming. And when you talk about inheritance, that becomes an issue of method dispatch. That's kind of probably the clear term that we were looking for. So method dispatch is, for example, when I call for example, things like overloading would come into this, right? Like I'm using the plus operator, and plus operator is overloaded. So I need to figure out which method I actually need to call, when the plus function is called. Or then you call, a getter of a person class, like the .age getter, which would return the age of that person. Like that's also a method dispatch. Like what actual procedure should I go and pick up and then execute in order to, kind of satisfy your demand. So encapsulation is one thing. Then method dispatch and inheritance is one thing.
Hmm.
The other things that came to mind was so it kind of gives you a shelving mechanism, right? Like you're like, okay, I have a person class, and whatever related to person goes here. So
Mhm.
that's like the notion of class. Let me see if I can actually find that paper.
So obviously this informed kind of, consciously or not, this kind of informed your development on this project.
Well, I would say that what you said about object-oriented programming and flow, like flow-based programming or data flow or things like that, are actually not in opposition.
Mm.
I think there are many, many different flavors of object-oriented programming. And the reason this discussion came up with Ward was that the sort of, not just with Ward, also other people who I had conversations with who kind of had more intuition about object-oriented programming. Whenever I showed my spreadsheet stuff, they would say, oh, this is object-oriented programming. And I was like, wow, this is very interesting. How so?
Mm.
And Ward, for example, said something very interesting to me. He said that whenever I think of clicking on a wiki link, I think of it as sending a message to an object. So Ward, for example, is thinking of as a wiki document as some sort of object that you can send messages to. Like one message that you can send to is expand on your like fifth link or whatever, right? So the other example of object-oriented programming is the Sketchpad system. Our Sketchpad system is a very, very old system. It's been around for a really long while, and it's sort of a seminal work in
this is the earliest known movie.
seminal work in computer graphics. And, what happens in the Sketchpad is, for example, for object-oriented programming person, is this notion of sort of a master object and replicas. So I don't know if this is visible on my screen or not.
Yep, it is.
So this is sort of a master object, and there's going to be replicas of this on the stage, I think. And then when you make modifications to the replica, to the sort of the blueprint, it would reflect itself in other instances. I'm just trying to find out
Right.
where so that's also this notion that you get from inheritance in object-oriented programming, right? You get when you make a change, then you get values that sort of automatically would benefit from changes,
Right.
in the blueprint. So this is, again, like you can see a flavor of that here. So I would say this is like another flavor of object-oriented programming, which is a non-procedural object-oriented programming.
Have you played with sort of making fractals within this system? It just reminded me when you were showing the Sketchpad that I've worked a lot with AutoCAD and 3D modeling, and I guess in the mechanical engineering world they would call it like parametric modeling, where you make one sort of object that you've defined really well through your like design intent, and then you can just sort of play with all the different dimensions as variables, and then you can sort of scale up or down your designs in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the starting point of where these values that flow in time come into play. So you sort of get parametric animations in a way. So let me continue with the demo. So we have this value that flows in time, right? So when you have an integer inside a cell, then you get all the normal operations that you would get on the integer, like a modular arithmetic. So for example, I can calculate a value that is stored in B6 mod 5, and then I get a 5-step counter, right? So suppose instead of triangles, there are squares here. I have a formula that can take a shape and turn it, for example, 3/5, in clockwise direction. So for example, turn A2 3/5 would result in this guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can use the value that is in C6 as the parameter to my turn function. So this way I would get an animation inside cell, or I would get a shape that flows in time. So let's see how it works. So if it's say turn A2 with, so for example, a C6 fifth, then as the counter ticks, my shape also ticks. So that's one notion of parametricity that I get inside this thing. But also maybe the size of the shape would also fluctuate in time. So depending on what operations, Robert, I would have on my shapes in this example, I would get various sorts of parametricity, and these parameters could be provided using time, could be provided using like a random distribution. So that's the things that the spreadsheet grid would provide to you.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of questions I had. Like, what about Elm makes it particularly useful for this sort of application, or is there something else that would have just as easily been able to do just this? I'm not really familiar with that particular language or sort of its alternatives.
Yeah. Actually, that's a fantastic question. And I would say about Elm in particular, there were two things that really helped. The first is that Elm provides support for basic types. And let me just write this down. So I guess the question is why Elm? And I think my first answer is basic types. And why basic types? I think basic types really helped refactoring. So you get some sort of a free help from the compiler when things go wrong. So in order to mention that, maybe I would need a little bit of description about how Elm works, but let me give the other reason. I think the other reason is being explicit about side effects. So they call this purity in different languages. But what essentially means is that in Elm, just like in React, you get this idea of every time you kind of describe your entire application, right? Connor, would you would that match with your experience in React?
Yeah. And in general, the different sort of like UI frameworks that they have that are popular today, they all share not the basic types thing necessarily, but the explicitness about side effects thing.
Yeah.
Because they just have to, because the complexity of user interface development has grown like exponentially to the point where everyone that was ending up with kind of the spaghetti code problem, where it's like you can't manage side effects because it's too big for any person to really track with the growth of the thing and all the different variables and everything. So yeah, having kind of this framework in place is really really useful. And I think I'm imagining that you could get, but what about the shape itself? How do you render the shape? Because that's not something that Elm's going to help you with, right?
Actually, Elm does provide a really good graphics library.
Oh, okay, like SVGs?
Graphics, but it is not handled in my system using using Elm, but it is. So I guess I wanted to check in with Robert to see if he kind of like relates to any of the 2 points that I brought up about Elm. Maybe I can first ask him about that, and then
Yeah. Well, when you were saying like just saying something like basic types doesn't like immediately make me realize
Yeah.
what that means or why that's powerful. Maybe just from lack of, I guess, experience in using different languages or that sort of thing. But I think from Connor's explanation, I got a little bit more understanding about the sort of side effects. And actually, side effects was something Connor, I think, was explaining to me recently about sort of.
Yeah.
So do you have a feel for how web development with jQuery or things like that feel?
jQuery specifically, no. I've only done just, I guess, a little bit of sort of JavaScript stuff, and
Yeah.
yeah. But I
So
guess
like in
jQuery is
JavaScript,
JavaScript.
like a typical application, right? Uh, I feel like at this point in conversation, there's not much difference between React or Elm or anything else, but the
Hmm.
real difference is with like vanilla web platform and whatever it provides to you
Hmm.
versus modern web application. Like what is it that, or I mean, the compelling reason was Facebook.com, right? The reason React was
Yeah.
developed was to handle the complexity of the user interface of Facebook.com.
Yeah.
So do you sort of have a feeling for what makes it complicated to design a interface of Facebook.com using vanilla JavaScript, and why people even bother with choosing the web framework?
Yeah, somewhat because Connor's also taught me a little bit about React and how it sort of like is very deliberate about like how things tie into each other and how data flows through sort of a more sort of logical structuring of like uh, how certain, I forget what they're called, but something like modules talk to other little pieces in sort of
Yeah.
a flow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess in the sort of vanilla web world, the complexity is that, for example, when I get when I get a notification on Facebook, right? Like you liked one of my photos, then this notification, then first of all, something should handle all this connection with the backend, because we transition from the time that web pages would be just like thrown at you and done, right? So Gmail changed that. So the complexity of handling this, like coordinating with an remote server, is itself a lot, right? You got to listen to like events that come out of order, and it's very asynchronous and it's difficult. So the bookkeeping of that is difficult. So that's one thing the frameworks provide to you. So for example, with Elm, I get that for free, right? I don't need to do much beyond providing an address, and Elm kind of handles establishing a connection, retrying the
Yeah.
failed connection, all of that. So I don't even need to think about it. So is that the same in React as well?
Yeah, there's a lot that's kind of like out of the box, just like just working for you, and so it gives you a lot of
Yeah.
speed in kind of iterating and development. Yeah. And the type thing that you're mentioning, do you know about TypeScript, Nima?
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I haven't actively used it.
Yeah, TypeScript is like is a complete sort of type system for JavaScript. It's a kind of a superset of JavaScript. So it makes JavaScript into a strongly typed language, which offers you all of the what you say, the confidence of refactoring and the free help from the compiler, which all come about because there's a third benefit too, which is that as your project grows, you get documentation for free because the type system is described, which means that you've described the types of all of your variables, which is half or more of what documentation is in the first place. So when you get this auto-generated
Yeah, I mean,
potential for documentation, which is a huge benefit too.
and that's for TypeScript, right?
Yeah, for TypeScript. And
Could you give me like a good TypeScript package with nice documentation?
um, I don't know exactly.
I think Ender is written in TypeScript, right?
I know that there are ways to just generate docs from TypeScript files. And I also know that people use TypeScript with like React or with different, so people kind of combine TypeScript and React to get kind of the combination of these benefits that you're
I see.
talking about. Yeah, but there's some other stuff we're hoping to get to in the call too. So
yeah, maybe we can shift gears and Connor can demo a little bit of, because what we've been working on recently, and Connor just pushed like a big sort of change, which I haven't seen yet. And then maybe that'd be a good way for you to sort of see what we've been playing with recently.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think you're right, Connor. I did at some point turn on multiple screen sharing, though I've never actually played with that on Zoom, how that works. If multiple people are screen sharing, how you track that, I don't know.
I saw that I could switch between Nima's two screens when I briefly had it shared. But
cool.
Yeah, so Robert gave a little description of the project that we've been collaborating on. And it goes back to when we were working like on a different project called MetaMaps together for like quite a few years. We were working on it a lot between 2012 and 2015 or 16, and this is when we kind of started experimenting with this. I'll share. Which screen did I share? Not that one. This one. So originally, we had these maps which were just graphs. That where the whole idea with them is that you would lay out your information and play with your information, and you could create data and nodes, and things were categorized by iconography, and it's all kind of selectable and movable and stuff. But I'll kind of skip over from there to where we went with it, which was that we found, what if we wanted to play with different layouts where you didn't have to position the nodes themselves, but there was an algorithm driving the kind of layout of the information.
So what are these maps are supposed to represent?
Just people's thinking. It's also collaborative in real time, so you could focus on this artifact at the same time as someone else, and just be kind of making connections, representing information, and exploring topics through a kind of what we would call kind of a structured or a semi-structured sense-making process, where you're kind of making externally your thinking and your thought process and your connections that you're making and stuff like that, and someone else is maybe doing that at the same time, and then you're kind of evolving this shared artifact towards something that you both look at it and you have a coherent.
So how much information you could have maybe on each node? Is it just a label of them, or
have this extra metadata like this? So things can have descriptions and links like this, and then they also have this type, like a reference.
How about on the links between them?
You can have a description and a.
Hey Connor, if you sign in, we could sort of demo a little bit of the real-time stuff, just quick.
Yeah, I could do that. Well, maybe we maybe come back to it if we have time.
Yeah. Just a quick note, something I'm interested there with your spreadsheet stuff is if it does do SVG things, I'm very interested in how you could do a parametric sort of SVG of a card, and then something like that could be embedded in a like a MetaMaps node. But anyways, that's sort of something for some other time.
So this one, what we experimented with is conversation threads, um, uh, as you might encounter like in Twitter, for example, like where technically there's threads of information like this. This represents a thread. There's an initial and then there's a reply to this tweet visualized by this. But once you get lots of people making lots of replies, it becomes kind of untrackable, and you can't represent such a nonlinear structure linearly and
That's right.
make it work. So then we started developing this, which was a way to represent these branches that occur in conversations.
So it's more a visualization and a graph exploration tool. And
but
also a real-time
authoring.
Yeah.
Like authoring information in this way. So I'll just start a new. And Robert,
And I say there is like an act as Connor or Robert, so it gives you like different perspectives based on the perspectives on the graph based on your
thing that we're just playing with right now, where I could say that I'm Robert, so it just doesn't have an identity system, kind of a verified thing. It's just kind of a playground. But if I create, so I'll call this the starting point. And then, Robert, do you get this on your, do you have a kind of new updates thing?
I just saw the new updates and highlight new, so yeah.
Uh-huh. Nice.
Yeah, cool.
So that takes you to here, right?
Yep. And if I reply to it, so for now, I'm just running this locally on my machine. And something I don't think Connor pointed out is that the node data is just, I think, something like JSON that we're just writing straight to GitHub. So GitHub's sort of storing the conversation at this point.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it's all like hashed and everything.
Yeah, it's kind of a distributed, there's no kind of central database. It's just like a JSON file. And so after Robert made a change, then I get this new updates, highlight new, refresh this, and this is like hello from Rob. So we can kind of go through this and make all these different points, expanding on the conversation, taking it in different directions,
Right.
and I think if you create like a series of the part that's new, which I wanted to show Rob, is that if you create a series of updates, Robert, like a couple new ones. Actually, I haven't tested this, so this is the test.
Yeah, I'm just entering in some now, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think would benefit the most from sort of a non-linear network-like conversation? Would it be one person, or would it be like a group of people? What setting would it be in?
Yeah, well, we imagine that there's the potential that a very large group of people could benefit from having a conversation this way, in the sense that typically threads online, they break down and lose their salience over time. So, for example, Reddit, I think of this as Reddit, you have all these nested comments, but eventually all of these comments, they die because they're too deeply nested that it becomes like everyone else has lost track of the rest of the conversation. So the idea is that potentially you could have a more robust conversation between more people if people could participate in such a forum as this, rather than a conventional forum. Because there's one of the ideas is that I'll pause for a second. So Rob, see how there's still, so I refresh and it goes to what is Nima's app called, but there's still new updates. If I click on this, then it should go, okay, well, that doesn't work so well, but then it takes me to, I want parametric SVGs. Then it takes me to, I want to talk about collective intelligence. Then it takes me to something like this, and there's no more new, highlight new. So that worked perfectly. So yay.
Cool.
So it kind of, and what I was thinking of doing next, Rob, was creating like a little dashboard panel that sits on the side and basically lists out those nodes explicitly for you to kind of see. So it's accumulating like a list, and then you could it's a little bit like an inbox in a sense. You could kind of like clear it without looking at it, or you could like go to it and then like focus on it or something. Like you could kind of dismiss it or like clear it or something like that.
Yeah, and I guess once we get into the problem of much larger scale conversations, maybe you don't want to follow everything on the whole map, or you can just sort of subscribe to one node and all of its children or something.
Absolutely, right.
Cool.
Well, speaking of graphs and conversations and thoughts that develop through mediums other than Twitter, there's also the federated wiki chat that I think is going to be continuing all the conversations we are having in a different language. So,
which time is it at? Is it right after this, or what's it? Oh, I see. I can't come because I have a work call, unfortunately, but I'm sure I'll hear about it from Rob and stuff. And Rob, there's one more thing that I want to show you, Rob, which is which I was developing this morning, and it's actually the bigger point of the little refactor that I did. Currently, it's work that I've got in a branch, but what it was, Rob, is this the dynamic reorganization of the content according to like what you select.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but it's too crazy right now. But it's kind of working. So
oh sweet.
So it dynamically reorganizes the thing according to like which node you're focusing on. So this really kind of highlights the custom algorithm that we were working on. Plus it animates in between things.
Yeah, and just for further context for Nima, the reason, because we already had some of this implemented on MetaMaps, but we sort of broke it out to sort of work on it in a more focused way. But the reason for the dynamicness is that we're hoping that you can sort of, at any moment when you're thinking of replying to something, you have in your view like a visual context of the like most proximate sort of part of the conversation that would relate to sort of where you're at. So you don't have to like go exploring, it sort of brings it into your view for you.
I think I follow the idea, and I think the model makes a lot of sense. And we should have some conversation sometime about this later, because some of the spreadsheet things that I do is also related to graphs. So yeah.
Cool. Well, I intend to sort of, actually it won't be at this time each week, but I intend to have a call sort of to do pair coding and that sort of thing. Like that's the point of this call, to do it more regularly. So maybe I'll tie you into the calendar or scheduling for that, and you can come hang out here, and we'll chat about it some more. So yeah, I think I'll stop the recording for now, and because I know the next thing's starting and Connor's got to go, but thank you very much for sort of demoing and playing with us.
Great. Demo is always good. I hope this kickstarts for more demos and more focused conversations.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's really fun. It's great to see what you're working on, Nima, and to meet you.
Likewise.
Yeah, and I'll see you again in the space here.
For sure. Yeah. Take care.
Okay.
Matrix Cafe next time. Bye-bye.